Well, hi and welcome to the Viewfinders Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Graham Dargy, and today I'm talking with Trevor Cole, an award-winning travel and documentary photographer from Northern Ireland, who's been all over the world in pursuit of his photography. And segue coming up here, speaking of all over the world, one of the really fun things for me about doing the podcast is checking out the analytics and seeing where in the world people are listening to this show. It's really fascinating to me. So the UK obviously is the most popular place you might expect, and followed by the US. But the show's also been listened to all over Europe, in Mexico, Taiwan, Bangladesh, Australia, and we're quite popular in India as well. So if you're out there in one of those far-flung places, I would love to connect with you. You can find me on the new Viewfinders Podcast Instagram account. That's at Viewfinders Podcast. And connect there. Yeah, and if you do that, why don't you send me a DM or a comment just to let me know that you've been listening to the show. I'd love to hear that. I'd love to see what photography you've been up to and just generally connect. You can also check out view-finders.co.uk where you can find out all about my photography, and you can get my free long exposure tutorial video there too. Let me take a minute to mention my upcoming live event, Viewfinders Live, an evening with Mark McCall, sponsored by MPB. I'm hosting this online event on Monday, the 15th of February 2021 at 7:30pm, and it features one of Scotland's finest landscape photographers, Mark McCall. Mark is going to give an entertaining and informative talk about his amazing photography from Scotland to Iceland to Norway to Sweden and everywhere else that he's been. You can ask Mark anything in the live Q&A. You could even win a £50 voucher courtesy of the event sponsor MPB. Mark's a great guy, really knows his stuff and has a great way about him, so it's sure to be a great night in, because nights in are the new nights out in lockdown, for anyone with an interest in landscape photography. Tickets are available now on Eventbrite for the strange price of £11.37. That is £10 for the ticket, plus Eventbrite's booking fee. I'd also like to thank MPB for sponsoring the event. MPB, if you don't know, is a place where you can buy and sell used photography equipment. Camera gear is so expensive, and buying used is a great way to get the kit you really want while saving some money. I've used MPB a few times over the years for lenses and also for my filter kit, and I always recommend them to anyone who asks me about buying their next lens. So thanks to MPB for giving me a £50 voucher to give away at Viewfinders Live, an evening with Mark McCall on Monday the 15th of February 2021 on Zoom. Hope I can see you there. Okay, let's get to this show. This week my guest is Trevor Cole, a travel and documentary photographer from Northern Ireland. Trevor's career as a geography teacher has taken him all over the world, and his incredibly atmospheric photographs of South Sudanese herdsmen won him the Travel Photographer of the Year People and Culture Prize in 2019. I liked Trevor's photography before I spoke to him, but hearing how he goes about his work and how much passion and care and respect he has for the people and places he shoots give me an even greater appreciation for what he does. Our conversation covers Trevor's childhood growing up among the Troubles in Northern Ireland, how a road trip to North Africa changed his life, the keys to taking a great portrait, and much, much more. I'm sure you're going to take plenty away from this week's episode. I love this chat, and I'm excited to share my conversation with Trevor Cole. Hi Trevor, welcome to the show. How's things?
Fine, thank you, Graham. Nice to meet you. Nice to see you on the screen.
Likewise. So where are you based?
I'm currently based in a little village called Dunfanaghy in northwest Donegal, right on the wild Atlantic Way.
No, it sounds good. Is it? You get a bit of weather over there, I'm sure.
We've got a bit of weather at the moment. There's snow in the mountains, but yes, the weather makes it and sometimes breaks it.
When I discovered your photography, Trevor, I was really struck by the sort of depth and diversity and quality. Those are three great things to get together, and you seem to have travelled extensively, and you look like you're very adept at engaging the people you meet on those travels. And I the pictures I think that really grabbed me were the cattle camps in South Sudan. And I was really interested to hear about some of your experiences that you've had on the road. And so we'll get into those things later, but let's go back in time. I read that you were born in Derry, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And so did you grow up there?
I grew up there, went to school there. My family were farmers, but my dad also worked for the DuPont company.
Mm.
But after I finished school in Derry, I went to university locally in Coleraine on the north coast, Ulster University. And then at the tender age of 21, I went and did a postgraduate certificate in education after my degree in geography.
Mm.
And that's when I moved to England. And from then until 12 years ago, I was out of Ireland.
Mm-hmm. And so it's just interesting to hear that you had a degree in geography. So the world was always on your agenda, right?
Absolutely. I refer to myself as a geographer photographer because when I look at my photography and I take photographs, effectively, it's geography. You know, whether it
Mm.
be people, culture, landscapes, streets, whatever it is, I can connect it to my passion for the subject which I grew to love and taught for a long number of years, 24 of which were overseas.
Mm. So when you were studying that, were there places that just you were maybe you were learning about that just caught your attention and made you want to go and travel the world?
Well, I think because my father worked for the DuPont company, he gave us a flavor of travel because he was posted for a little while in Luxembourg. So even at primary school, we got to go to Europe, which was quite a
Mm.
long time ago. But my first real travel experience was when a group of 10 of us at the age of 18 decided to rent a minibus and drive from Derry to Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia overland and come back up through Italy again. We went down through the western part of Europe and back up through Central Europe. And that just blew me away. And
Mm.
from then, and still now, the passion to travel exists.
That sounds kind of okay. So let me go back to Luxembourg. In those, what kind of year was that? I don't. I mean, it just seems like traveling to Europe. Maybe I'm not trying to uh, have a knock about your age, but in
To,
those
to,
days,
to, to
seemed
put me on the
that was
geological timescale.
it probably probably wasn't that common, right? I mean, was it quite
No,
unusual in those
it
days?
wasn't. This was the early 70s. So it was a long time ago.
Hmm.
And it was incredibly unusual then. Um, then, you know, even going to North Africa, that was
Hmm.
74. And then I went again the next year to Eastern Turkey, driving in a tiny
Hmm.
little Datsun.
Hmm.
And it was at about that time, the second trip. The first trip I realized I needed to photograph and didn't have a camera. The
Hmm.
second trip, I persuaded my parents to buy an SLR. So
Hmm.
I got this wonderful Rolleiflex SLR, quite an unusual camera actually. My daughter still has it. Um, and that's when I think the seeds of the photographic passion were planted.
So, was that did the photography come to you quite easily, or I mean, how was that journey for you? Because obviously the two things, travel and photography, kind of go together.
They do, absolutely. And I think the answer is probably yes. I almost did art for my further education rather than geography. I'm glad I didn't. But there's always been a little bit of the artist in me.
Mm.
And I've always had, I think, an eye for what I think is aesthetically pleasing. So to me, that is probably an intuitive thing, but
Mm.
I've always enjoyed capturing what I think looks good.
Mm. So were you sort of creative as a kid?
Yes, in the sense that I love to get a sketch pad out and draw, and I even oil painted in my early teens. And really, the transition to photography was quite an easy one. And I used to get frustrated when I was sketching or drawing because I never quite got to the point where I thought, wow, that's really what I want to achieve. When I can pick up a camera and it's almost spontaneous,
Mm.
and you can see what you've got.
Mm.
It makes it a lot easier.
So I was curious about you growing up in Derry. Were there troubles at that time?
Yes. Precisely at the time I was at school, quite traumatic times. Although when you live in a context where there are uh, conflicts and troubles, as they call them here, you accept it. It becomes a part of life,
Mm.
and you don't realize the impact of it all until you take off and go and live somewhere else and look back, and then you see the stupidity of it, but you also come to understand it better, because whenever you live here, you're very vulnerable to the prejudices which exist, and it's a bit like social media today. You can be convinced that one viewpoint is right, but as a teacher of geography, I used to always tell my students, look at the number of different viewpoints you can have in
Mm.
something, and then we can debate them.
So if you're growing up then with that sort of culturally ingrained prejudices, and then you go travel like you did at a young age to far off and exotic places, what does that do to your mind and your thinking when you go and see all these other points of view?
Well, for me, it was totally enlightening. It opened my mind to the fact that bias and prejudice truly does exist, and in a way that I'd never thought I'd see. It's truly interesting to take yourself out of a context and look back at it and realize that there were so many things that were drilled in almost. It's a bit like, I'm not the most religious person on earth, and I don't like anybody brainwashing me or trying to brainwash me. I like to look at things objectively and to see for myself what I think is the reality behind a story.
Hmm. So, okay, let's go back to your timeline here. So you said that you lived outside of Ireland for some time.
Mm.
So talk to me about that period of your life. Where did you end up living?
Well, I lived for a year in Sheffield doing my postgraduate certificate of education, then 10 years outside London in Hertfordshire.
Was that for teaching then,
Teaching,
or?
yeah, I was teaching in a comprehensive school. It was a commuter belt school, so it was a really nice school, so it was a good place to start. And then the desire to travel, which has always been there. I used to backpack in the summers and take my camera with me. So I ended up in the 80s backpacking all the way through Southeast Asia, going to Zimbabwe and
Mm.
Kenya. And then I just thought, well, why not live overseas and fully immerse yourself? So in 1988, I went to live in Singapore as the head of the geography department in a very prestigious, wonderful school. Taught me how to teach. Very, very open-minded style. It taught the International Baccalaureate, I taught kids to think, not to pass exams. And if you
Mm.
teach kids to think, they pass the exams anyway. I stayed there 13 years, then moved to West Africa for a year to teach. That wasn't such a good school, so I only stayed a year. Then I went to Italy for 4 years, Ethiopia for 4 years, and Brazil for 2 years. And then came back to Ireland in 2012.
Okay, that's quite a journey then.
Oh yeah,
So
it's a long one.
it's amazing that teaching can take you all around the world like that, because I can imagine a lot of teachers might just stay in the same school for the bulk of their career.
Sometimes
Um,
for life.
yeah, which is fair enough, I guess, if that's what you want to do. But that's quite an adventure for a teacher. So, and photographing the cultures all the while.
All the while, I mean, because I ran geography field trips, of course, that enabled me to immerse myself in the landscapes of Southeast Asia, the diverse cultures of the Himalayas. Of course, this was pre-digital, but I traveled to most Southeast Asian countries, then also Central Asia, South Asia. Even from Singapore, we traveled around Southern Africa to Latin America, and always camera in hand. So I'm totally self-taught.
And then you're back to Ireland. Why back to Ireland now?
That's a really good question. Because I could still be teaching. Um, Basically, I had two parents with dementia. And my sister, my only sibling, she's an intensive care nurse, but she was really taking the brunt of looking after them. And also, I was divorced, and I have two adopted daughters from Southeast Asia, one born in Cambodia, the other born in Singapore. And after that, they came back to the UK. So I didn't get to see them enough. So there was a push factor. And then I suddenly thought to myself, why not have a go at following your other passion, photography? And there were lots of family issues to sort out, a bit of care for my parents, and the photography together with family became the factors that the gravitational pull, if you like, back to Ireland.
And so is that when you started the photography tours business, or?
Yes, we started. I have a friend who lives very close to me here. He's loves taking landscape shots, and we decided, to do a few weekend, excuse me, photo courses for local people. So we took them out around the coastline and taught them about composition and just all the tools that the camera offers, getting them away from taking shots in program mode or automatic mode and using aperture, doing manual shots, types of metering using ISO. And we ran these little courses around what is now the Wild Atlantic Way, and we still do that. I'm doing an online course for local people at the moment, every Monday night. But then, the desire comes to take it a little bit further. So we did a few in Iceland. We do one now to the west coast of your wonderful country, up to Skye, the Hebrides, over to Allapool, down to Torridon, and back to Fort William, including Glencoe, of course. Wonderful. And then, we also do a few for ourselves. We took ourselves off to Canada, and to Austria, and now, because of my teaching in Ethiopia, I started taking tiny groups to especially the tribal areas of the Omo Valley in Ethiopia. And I've been doing that almost, not every year, but almost every year since 2010. Well, I've been going back since I left Ethiopia every year.
Mm.
Sometimes for myself, I think it's important to go and shoot for yourself sometimes as
Mm.
well.
The tours that you run look incredible, really, and everybody, myself included, we all do. Skye, Glencoe. There's Iceland, Faroes, and those are a lot of the places that people go. Lofoten, but I haven't seen some of the destinations that you go to. I haven't seen people doing tours there, and so I wanted to. Well, that kind of takes us up to now start talking about your photography, really. So we'll get into some of the locations there. But I saw this on your website. I think it was on your website where you said, "I seek the moment and the light in whatever context I'm in." Is that something you said?
That sounds exactly like something I said.
So, well, when I read that, I thought that just sounds like the heart of travel and documentary photography, seeking the moment and the light in whatever context. But what does that process of seeking the moment really look like for you? What are you going through when you're in that process?
Well, I think, when the light is right, even the ordinary can become extraordinary. That's
Mm.
not an original quote, but it's so, so true. Whether you're shooting landscapes and that beam of light comes down from the Irish heavens and, creates an intense shade of green in a distant hill, or whether you're shooting a soft sunset on one of the west-facing beaches here, or whether you're capturing a face, a portrait, or a village context, it loses its impact if the time of day isn't right. So I
Mm.
try to shoot, especially in Africa. You have a small window of opportunity because the sun rises rapidly, sets rapidly, but that hour or half an hour, that's the time to capture the moment. And the key for me is always pressing the shutter at the right time, because especially with someone's face, I want to capture the emotion. I want there to be a connection, not just walk into a village and walk out again and think, well, I've taken a few shots. I want to spend time. I want the photograph to have meaning, depth. Don't always achieve it, but you have to, you accomplish in proportion to what you attempt.
Mm. So when you in a new place, then say you find yourself in a village, Ethiopia, somewhere, you're seeing it fresh for the first time, and different culture, lots of visual information. You see everything, when you're in a place for the first time, especially when it's different. You go to somewhere else in the UK or Europe, it's kind of similar, but when you go to somewhere that's a very different culture, you kind of notice everything. And so, how do you approach that? Do you dive in, or do you step back and take some time to really observe what's going on?
Well, that's a really good question. I first went to the tribal areas when I was living in Singapore, strangely. I took a trip to Ethiopia in the year 2000. When I first went to the Omo Valley, it just blew my senses in every
Mm.
direction. And of course, you know, I dived in, but retrospectively, that's always a mistake.
Mm.
Now, I mean, I'll give you an example. I think it was January 2019, I went to South Sudan for the first time. I've been twice, and I'm going again, touch wood, in February with a small group. Um, I arrived at this incredible cattle camp, and it was like nothing else I've ever seen. And I just wondered first. I was scared to pick up the camera and shoot because you don't know how the locals or how the herders are going to respond,
Mm.
which is why I always, in every African context, take a local guide who interacts with them first, and that always gives you time to think. And when I'm with a small group, I always say, let's wander, let's look. Don't get your cameras out just yet, and let's absorb what is out there and see what we have the capacity to capture. And I think that's incredibly important. If you dive in, you don't think, and you look at your photographs afterwards, and you've missed the feet of the cattle, or the foot of the herder, or you have to look, especially somewhere like that, you have to look at the edges as well as your focal point.
I wanted to ask you specifically about a couple of projects. The South Sudan Dinka cattle camp, you've just described it a little bit. When I saw those pictures, I mean, they're so atmospheric. Can you describe who those people are, where they live, and what they're about?
Yeah, absolutely. Part of my geography, I've always had a real passion and interest in indigenous people, which is why my photography focuses on them. But for years now, I've wanted to go to South Sudan. I've also wanted to go, and I did that a couple of years ago, to the Wadabi tribe in Chad and the tribes of southern Angola, all of which were fantastic. But the cattle herders of South Sudan, the Dinka and the Mundari are perhaps the more authentic of the two, still living very traditionally. I first saw photographs taken by Sebastian Salgado, black and white, years ago. He must have went there before there was ever conflict. And I thought, well, as soon as this place opens up again and becomes safe, I'd really like to go. So I had a contact and decided a couple of years back this. I was really nervous about it because South Sudan has a reputation, and I didn't want to get caught up in conflict or trouble of any sort. But basically, I went in. I always do a little bit of reading. The Mundari tribe, a huge tribe, very tall. I think they might arguably, them and the Dinka, be the tallest tribe in Africa. And they live. It's like a form of symbiosis. Their connection to their cattle is quite incredible. I couldn't get over walking into the camp for the first time, and the dust in the air is really ash from the fires that they stoke and create every day. They gather the dung. The kids gather the dung in the morning. They dry it out. They use it as a fuel, and then they take that fuel and when it's down to ash form, they massage it into the cattle to mitigate against insect bites. They massage it into themselves for the same purpose. So they walk around these cattle camps looking like ghosts. They often wash themselves under the stream of cattle urine in the morning, which after a while turns the tribesmen's hair orange. Now the women don't cover themselves in ash, but they work with the cattle as well, and I've never seen anything like it in the sense that these cows are, you can almost see two-way affection. And they don't kill them for meat. They take blood from them, and maybe if there's a very special celebration, they will use meat. But in general, they're not big meat eaters, unlike us in the Western world now. But incredible culture, and just wonderful people. They have love having their photograph taken, and you can get so many candid shots because they're just getting on with their work. Of course, the little boys occasionally pose, and so too the girls, but in general, it's very easy to take photographs of them.
It's the sets of images, and these are the ones that I think won you the Travel Photographer of the Year,
People and Culture.
People and Culture Award. So congrats for that.
Thank you.
Wanted to just mention that in case you were too humble to mention it yourself. But the images, the cattle just look phenomenal, don't they? I mean, I've never seen a cow that looks so amazing. And yeah, with the way the dust kind of hangs in the air, they just, everything's kind of silhouetted almost. It's really atmospheric. One thing I noticed, again, my experiences with Maasai villages, and I don't want to make it out like I'm always hanging out with Maasais in their villages. I've been a couple of times, but when you go to these places, you can sort of know what to expect because you've seen images, but the images don't communicate the heat. That was just because we would go in the middle of the day to the Maasai village on the kind of trip that we do. It's just too hot. It's like physically difficult to be there. The smell of the smoke and from the fires burning in the traditional homes, the smell from the animals. It's very, very kind of visceral experience, isn't it? I guess it must be the same visiting the Dinka.
Absolutely. When you go to these camps, we deliberately actually camp in the camp or 50, 100 meters away from the camps, which is perfectly safe to do so. But it actually means you can go at dawn or you can go at sunset. There's actually no point in going to the camps in the middle of the day because all the cattle go to graze on the floodplains of the Nile. And it's amazing. They go by themselves, no herders, and they come back by themselves. The only time they send herders out is if one or two don't come back. But the whole atmosphere is at its best first thing in the morning when the smoke's in the air and the dust's, and it just creates this it's fading scene where you have these Ankoli Watusi cows with the longest horns in the world, and the herders in their cloaks or blankets, sometimes stark naked, with the cattle, and it's as if you've got a biblical painting in front of you with everything fading almost into nothingness. So there's a hint of it gives the photo, I think, amazing depth. It really, really blew me away.
So, and these guys will have lived like this for hundreds or thousands of years, so it's really like going back in time in a way.
It is. I mean, a lot of the indigenous cultures, even in Ethiopia, I mean, they're being affected by change, of course, and it's not good. But they are living very sustainably. They have a small, as the geographer in me would say, ecological footprint. They don't take anything from anywhere else. Maybe the medicine for their cattle, which we help to supply when we go. There are not many tourists yet, or not many travelers or photographers, but it's always nice to be a part of something sustainable rather than creating a human zoo scenario, which I hate.
Okay, you mentioned it. Let's talk about the Wadabi tribe in Chad. I've never seen photos of that tribe. I've never ever seen that. And when I read that it was in Chad, I was like, Chad? Nobody goes to Chad. I've met someone a couple of years ago in Aberdeen, and the lady was saying that she'd just come back from Chad. I think she was a missionary. And I was like, Chad? I had the same response, because it's just, you meet people from Nigeria, you meet people from Angola, you meet people from lots of places, but you never meet someone from Chad or someone who's been to Chad. So I was really intrigued about that. Yeah, these are amazing images of a festival where It's hard to kind of describe the expression and the look that these guys have. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's going on there?
Absolutely. I mean, I first saw photographs of the Wadabi years ago. It must have been National Geographic or a similar magazine in Niger. The Wadabi exist. They're part of. They're a subgroup of the Fulani. They're cattle herders, nomadic pastoralists, and they exist in the Sahel zone of Africa, which is a zone between the savannah and the Sahara Desert. So they have to migrate to get fresh pasture. But at the end of the wet season, the cows are in good shape. They have an annual festival called the Gerawol, where the men beautify themselves, and it's something I've always wanted to see, and I had an opportunity. I should have gone back again this year. Touch wood, maybe next year. But to see these men in one place, which is chosen by, it's sort of a very auspicious occasion, and you never know exactly where it's going to be. So the guys that take you here have to find out. And it's only this once a year that all the clans of the Wadabi, they get together in a number of different places. And the men spend time with their makeup, with their body paint, with their beaded robes, and they make themselves. It's very effeminate what they do, and they're beautiful people. They're very finely structured, and then they start dancing. Through the night. The last night we were there, the final night, they danced all night. We were in tents all night, and it was hot. But basically, the girls who are, it would go against all sort of beliefs here. The girls, as soon as they reach puberty, have the right to choose a man. And so they do. And they go up and touch the guy that has beautified themselves in a way that truly appeals to them. And they, touch that guy, and that means they can, if they want, have a liaison together. And that liaison can be, if you like, a one-night get-together, or it can be for longer than that over the period of the festival, or it can lead to something much longer lasting. But to see these girls with their tattooed faces, they all have the most incredible tattoos, even from babies. And, they cut themselves with razor blades, and they rub ash into it, so the tattoos are black. And there were two clans, the Japta and the Sudasakai. And the Sudasakai have fewer tattoos, but they all have tattoos. The Japta, I've never seen anything like it. Their faces were etched with black scars. And that is part of their cultural beautification. And they're truly, truly nomadic. They don't stay in one village. They move all the time with their cattle.
There's not a lot of tourists and outsiders around at this point,
No,
I guess.
No, very few. It's opened a little bit. I think the first time this company arranged this, there were 10 people watching. And it's quite a big event. And whenever I went in, I think it was 2018, yes. There were 30 people watching, but they divided us up into 3 sets of 10. So it was so unintrusive, and it was a festival for them. We were just bystanders. They were doing nothing that you could describe as They're just doing it for the tourists. Absolutely not. This
Mm.
It's like going to the cattle camps. They do it. Their life is their life, and it's the same with the
Mm.
Wadabi. It's done for them. It's not an act put on to attract money from tourists.
More tourists go, presumably that might change. I mean, when I took my group to the Maasai village, someone was saying, well, some of that was a bit of a performance. And I thought, well, yeah, for sure, but you go to Edinburgh and there are guys playing bagpipes in the
Yeah,
street,
yeah.
it's like for money. So there's not, I'm not going to say there's anything wrong with that, but with the influx of more tourism, I mean, how do you think these cultures can preserve the traditions, which are
Ooh.
incredible and should be preserved, while continuing to exist in a changing and modern world, and maybe letting go of some harmful practices like FGM and so on? Is that a difficult path for these people, do you
I
think?
think I think it's an incredibly difficult path. I mean, at the moment, places like South Sudan and Chad are getting very, very few people, very few. So the
Mm.
impact is small, but there is no question that this is going to change. And in some parts of the world, it already has changed. I first went to the Thai hill tribes in 1989, and it blew my mind. I dread to think what it would look like today if I went back.
Mm.
I first went to the Omo Valley, as I said, in Ethiopia in 2000, and I was there earlier this year in February. And there's been a lot of change. Um, Westernization, Chinese T-shirts, instead of the girls being bare-breasted, a lot of them are covering
Mm.
themselves up. Missionaries. So I'm quite anti any form of proselytizing. Um, New roads, telecommunication masts, government influence, acculturation where they want the tribes not to appear primitive.
Mm.
The Chinese and big agribusiness, cotton, sugarcane, these things are all really damaging. Now, I try with my little photo tours to make them as sensitive as possible. So, as I said earlier, we go in, we spend time, we interact, we photograph when we feel comfortable. Yes, there are village fees and they get paid. And, you know, the facial paints, for example, let me pick the Suri tribe. They've been around for centuries before tourists. But
Mm.
the floral embellishment that the Suri girls put on top,
Mm.
that's new. But is it a bad thing, or is it in a way encouraging them to reinvent themselves culturally and still?
Mm.
So tourism in a way can stimulate the culture. They
Mm-hmm.
realize, whoa, we've got something that's special. Let's, keep it and make a little bit of money out of it. So it gives us a
Mm.
supplementary income. But of course, I get upset really when I see the Hammer tribe, the women of the Hammer tribe, and they're out at the bull jumping ceremony, and they used to be bare-breasted, and now they can be sometimes just wearing a bra and jumping around, and I think, whoa, that doesn't look very
Mm.
tribal. But who am I to judge at the end of the day?
Mm.
They have to make their own choices and decisions, and I'm a great fan of Survival International and empowering tribal people to make their own choices.
Mm.
Angola, I went to. I'm hopefully going next year again. Year before last, and that was fantastic because the tribes there haven't really been touched. But they all have a bit of Western influence now, Western clothes. Very rarely do you see, um, well, in some places you still can. It's incredible.
These are difficult questions, and,
No,
and,
no,
and
no.
it's really good to talk them through with you. The next thing I wanted to ask you about, if you don't mind, is portraits, because you have a lot of portraits, and it's something you obviously make a point of shooting. And you must have heard this before from your guests and so on. People love the idea of photographing people and making portraits, but they don't know how to approach someone, or they don't feel comfortable to especially when there's that cultural or language barrier. You just don't know if you're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. What you seem to have it down to a fine art. So what's the key to approaching someone to ask them to make their portrait?
Well, it's something that I think takes time. Time as in years of practice, and time in the village itself. But I rely very heavily, in Ethiopia, for example, I have a fantastic guide, and she's tribal. She's the only girl that does it in the Omo Valley, and she's amazing. And she speaks the mainstream Ethiopian language, Amharic, but she also speaks one of the tribal languages because her origins are of mixed tribal and Amhara. So she walks into the village. They know her. They can have a laugh with her. She jokes with them, and we sit around and relax. And when we start to take photographs, that makes it just so much easier. Because some people with me will be very uncomfortable about putting a camera in someone's face. Even if you've got a longer lens, which I quite often use. I'm a 70 to 200 millimeter person when it comes to taking portraits, a lot of the time. But I think once people are comfortable, the photograph reflects that. And basically that's when you get the emotion, the hint of a smile, or the kid with a big laugh, or I'm not a big laugh person really. I like more serious portraits. And then when I've got a relaxed scene in front of me, I can say to some of the people, would you mind sitting in the doorway? Because I like to use spot metering, and I like the brighter face cast against the darker background. And I only feel comfortable doing that. And I say to people with me, look, if you're not truly comfortable yourself, come with me. I'll set it up, and I'll take a shot or two, then you can take the slot, or even better, you take the slot to get the head-on shot, and I'll shoot them at the same time from the side to make it appear a bit more candid. But after a while, photographers do relax and they get into the swing of it, but you've got to show them the way and make them realize that they're just fellow human beings, or albeit of a different culture. And sometimes they can be really snappy and difficult, but that's when a sense of humor, and also the ability to say, okay, no problem, we won't take your photograph, sure. but you still hang around with them, and you're friendly towards them, and eventually you might find, okay, you can take my photograph now. It's all about time and interaction and socialization.
And being respectful, I think.
Totally and utterly. There's nothing worse, and it upsets me greatly, and I've seen it happen so many times. I'm going to be slightly, I'm at Mr. Cultural Understanding, but have been in the last couple of years groups of Chinese in particular coming to Africa and going in, paying them money in cash, taking photographs, and walking out again. No interaction. Complete, and it makes me so angry because it undermines what anybody else who is sensitive is trying to do.
Okay, well said. Okay, let's talk about your camera gear then. You touched on it there. You reach into your camera bag. What is the first thing that comes out? Camera and lens?
Depends what I'm doing. If I'm taking an Irish landscape, it's probably going to be the tripod plus the Nikon D850 and the 24mm f2.8 lens with the Nisi filter system. In a nutshell. If I'm in the African village, it's going to be, I have one of these spider belts, so I walk in with a holster system. And I tend to use the D850. I have a D810 as well, although I've just traded it in, and I'm waiting for the new Z7 Mark II. But I'll use that with an adapter because the D850 is the most incredible camera I've ever used. I use most commonly in a tribal village or for portraits the 7200 f2.8 or the 85mm f1.4. And I switch from one to the other. I try not to change lenses because of the dust. I don't want my sensor having lots of little bits of dust that annoy the life out of me when I'm trying to edit later.
Sure. I was about to ask if you need to travel light, but then I realised you've got an 850 and a 70-200 and another camera and a few lenses with you, so maybe you're not travelling as light as I thought.
No, I really wish I could travel lighter, and I'm going to have to think about doing so because it just gets heavier and heavier. The nice thing about going to the villages is you can usually park the vehicle outside. So I go in armed with one camera and one lens, and if I really need it, I either send one of the guides or drivers, because the drivers act as guides as well, which is fantastic. So I can send them back and grab my camera, or I just walk back and do it. I try not to carry a whole bag full in with me because I think it just looks a little bit intrusive.
And so, when you're shooting, say you go into a village or to a festival like in Chad. Okay, I guess if you're doing portraits, you're probably handling the camera differently than if you're covering if you're doing sort of documentary style photography. What's your sort of go-to way for using the camera? Are you like a manual guy, or you have it in a priority mode?
No, I'm almost 100% aperture priority. Only at night skies or something, or for long exposures do I use manual. Aperture priority is so versatile, and I tend to because these cameras, they've got a lot of megapixels. I tend to put my ISO higher than a lot of people. So I'll go in with an ISO of 400, 500, 800. No problem at all. You don't notice it anymore, and a tiny little bit of grain doesn't do any harm. Just so that I can shoot a shot and make sure it is sharp.
Yeah.
If it's not sharp, then I'm very unhappy, because at the end of the day, if I'm shooting a portrait of this beautiful tribal lady or an old man with a pipe, I want his eye, at least one of his eyes, in focus, and I want the lines on his face to be clear, etched. So the ISO, and I shoot almost always at f2.8 or f1.4, unless there's a group, in which case I'll put the f-stop at f5.6 or 7.2 to make sure I get both in focus, unless deliberately I want one out of focus. I play all the time, also with exposure compensation, because skins vary a lot. Even in Africa, they vary a lot in tones and depth of color.
Mm. But I notice you, yeah, just when you've said that, you'll have a lot of dark skinned subjects with a dark background. You'll have a feel for the type of compensation you need to do for that even before you shoot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I know what I'm going to do, but I always check. And if I've got it wrong, then quick tweak of the exposure compensation or the ISO, and off I go.
Okay, that's a great insight. I love to use to shoot an aperture priority as well, and I know like as a pro you're supposed to be shooting in manual, but it's too much trouble. And
Do you know what? Just to interrupt you there are very few pros that I've come across as travel photographers that shoot in manual.
mm,
Very, very few. The vast majority that I've seen, and I know some great photographers, truly great. Marcel Van Oosten, um, Ignacio Palacios. You know, a lot of these
mm,
guys, it's at the end of the day, it's about your creativity.
mm. And nobody will care what mode the camera was on at the end of the day when they see the picture. So,
No, absolutely.
okay, this brings us to around. We're gone slightly over time, but I want to, if you've got another few minutes, I want to go through
It's
a couple of
fine.
special rounds. This round, I call it double exposure because I'm going to choose a picture of yours to ask you about, which you can tell me the story behind. And then if you like, you can pick one of your shots, which has got a great or epic or memorable story or something that really moved your photography on, something special about that that you can tell me about as well. So the picture I wanted to ask you about, if I roll down your Instagram feed, it's a picture of an old Asan hunter from Namibia. And I know you have a lot of portraits, so I don't know if you're going to specifically remember this
I
one.
think
But
I know the one you're talking about, though. It's an old guy with a slightly pointed chin.
yeah, he looks about 300 years old.
He was only 295. Yeah.
Do you remember anything about that shot? It's just, to me, I mean, you've got a lot of strong portraits, but that one just
Well,
jumps out to me.
what we did, it was amazing. We went to this sort of remote area. I think it's called Noma. This was quite recent, actually. This was 2019. And we went to this uh, northeastern area of Namibia where the San people still exist in a fairly traditional way. And they took us out for the day and showed us how to make fire naturally. It's amazing watching them make fire, and they took their bows and their arrows. They often hunt for porcupines,
Mm.
and they showed us porcupine holes, and they walked through the bush with us. And along the way, you know, we had the opportunity to shoot them making fire. And this old guy, he was just wonderful. Always had a little smile on his face. And I took quite a few photographs of him because he was easy to photograph. He was a very nice character,
Mm.
and his face was just etched with stories. You know,
Mm.
a lifetime of hunting. The San people, or the Khoisan, they're also known as the Bushmen, one of the oldest tribes in Africa, said to be in that region for 30,000 years.
Mm.
And it's some of them that create the wonderful cave paintings in Africa. Basically, um, he at the end of the time, I think I just said, I'd really like to take your portrait, or I said to the guide, and it was no problem at all. So that's probably where that photograph, that was where that photograph
Yeah.
materialized from.
Yeah, it's such well, obviously you can feel the guy's good vibes that you've sort of described, and it's just a wonderful shot. So congrats for that. Is there, out of everything you've done, is there one thing that just stands out in your mind as completely unforgettable?
Oh, well, there's a little character that was a few years ago. You'll probably know the photograph if you browse through my photographs. Um, I was driving through a little town in Ethiopia called Jinka, and I saw this street kid, running in the street, and there were three vehicles. We were the last one, and I just said, stop, because this kid had blue eyes, and got out, and his name's Abusha, and he had no problem at all, or we had no problem at all, photographing him. But the story really is that in the last 3 or 4 years I've been going there, I've made a point of finding him and shooting him, so that I'm trying to sort of, if I can keep it going, it will be a photograph with a story through time of this kid with his unique, I think it's a genetic mutation, because apparently his little brother, who I haven't met yet, has it, and his mother has one blue eye and one brown eye. And that, to me, the photograph also went through to Travel Photographer of the Year, but it's just one of those that will always stand out. As it happens, lots of photographers have now photographed him, and I wasn't the first, but my guide knows him really well, and she just goes and finds him, and off we go. We take him out for the day and shoot him.
How old is he now, roughly?
He's about 12 now.
So is he still a street kid?
Well, his mum still exists, but he prefers to live off the streets because he knows he actually makes a lot of money out of tourists because he's so unusual looking, and he's nice. He's a nice kid. There's no anger or vanity, or he's got these blue eyes and an African kid, and whilst the locals may think he's unusual, everybody else thinks, whoa. So, special kid.
There's one shot that I have. I'll link these shots in the show notes so that people can find them. But there's certainly one that I've found where has got a leaf over his face partly. I think that's maybe the same kid that you're talking about.
Yeah, it is. It is.
But okay, great story. Okay, final round, and let's bring it home. It's a quick fire round. You ready?
Absolutely. Go for it, Graham.
This round is called Motor Drive because we're going to go fast.
All right.
Okay, wide angle or telephoto?
Both.
Disqualified. Okay, head or heart?
A heart.
Okay, this is a tricky one. The greatest Irish band of all time.
Well, it has to be U2, doesn't it?
Okay, they're better than Westlife?
I think they're more enduring.
Okay, everybody's going to agree with that. Okay, what was the last great book, movie, series, or album you experienced?
I've always been a lover of chill out type albums. I love something like Enigma. Great lover of 1980s Motown soul music.
Okay, lovely.
Movie. I mean, I'm a Shawshank Redemption type person, and that's from a long time ago, but it's still one of those movies. What else did you ask?
Just one of those movie, series, album. It doesn't have to be one of each, but just something great that you experienced lately. Okay, expensive lens cloth or the corner of your shirt?
Lens cloth.
Okay, this is a professional we're talking to here, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, what's a weird or unusual thing I could find in your camera bag?
Weird or unusual thing you could find in my camera bag? Mirrors. Because when I go to the tribal villages, they love to look at themselves. So I buy these little plastic mirrors, which are actually very good. They don't break. And I take them in my camera bag and hand them out, and they think it's wonderful.
Great. Okay, favorite photographer right now?
Salgado. He's just the man of my inspiration.
Okay, Salgado. Link in the show notes. What's one thing you wish you'd known 5 years ago?
Not to cheapskate. Buy the most expensive lens buy the best filter system and not have to replace them 5 years, 3 years, 2 years later because you've made a mistake.
So you want to name and shame the cheap thing that you bought, or shall we just leave it?
Well, I started with Koken filters a long time ago. Absolute mess. High tech, I didn't enjoy them. Now I use Nisi filters, and it's cost me a fortune over time, but the difference is remarkable.
Are they the magnetic ones?
No.
Okay.
I would be very tempted by those, but I don't dare not look at them because it just costs an absolute an arm and a leg.
I know exactly what you mean. Is there a dream location or project that you would love to shoot?
Yes, Iran. I'd love to shoot Iran, and hopefully this year I want to do 2 weeks in Kolkata and Dhaka in Bangladesh to shoot the shipyards and the workers, more street style stuff, just a little bit of a change, but I love that sort of thing.
I know a couple of people from Iran here in Aberdeen, and just the nicest, most lovely people you can meet.
Everyone I know has said it's a fantastic country, and I haven't been, and I'm desperate to go.
I've heard that as well, and I was talking to my friend, again, I met this lady at like a mum and toddler group that I went to with my daughter. She's from Iran, and so I was just asking her, what it's like and stuff. And she's like, oh no, it's beautiful, it's lovely. It's not like what we are shown and told it is about Iran.
Absolutely.
And so, I don't know, there's a lesson in there for sure.
There's a lesson for most Americans, for sure.
So, okay, last one. When do you feel at peace with the universe?
Do you know, when I'm walking on an Irish beach, when I'm fully immersed in nature and I'm breathing in fresh Atlantic air, looking, at the power of the waves and just the respect I have and appreciation I have for the joy of what this earth is all about. I'm a natural environment man.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and thanks, Trevor. Really appreciate your input on this conversation. I've really loved every minute of it.
Oh, thanks, Graham. You've been very easy to talk to.
Where can people go to connect with you, support your work, and find out more about what you do?
Well, my photo tours are alternativevisions.co.uk. We just run a few each year, small. They're not cheap because Africa isn't cheap. Cole Images is where I sort of have my portfolio. Instagram, at Trev Cole. Facebook, Alternative Visions Photography, or just Trevor Cole on Facebook. I'm also on 500px, and I try to get published photos on 1x, one exposure, which is challenging, but I love that little challenge.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to let you go, and all the best with the future. I hope you can get back on the road next year if this is all getting behind us a little bit.
I hope so too. I'm going to be an optimist and say, take the vaccine as soon as it comes. The science behind it is good.
Thanks, Trevor. We'll leave it there. Take care.
All right, Graham. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening. Follow Trevor on Instagram, and you can find out all about his photography tours at alternativevisions.co.uk. Also check out the photographers Trevor mentioned, some amazing work there. All the links and links to the other things we spoke about are in the show notes. And if you like this episode, also check out my conversation with Brian Hodges. That's season 1, episode 10. I think you're going to love that as well. I'd love to connect with you. You can find all my links in the show notes. And if you enjoy the episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. I'd really, really appreciate it. Okay, that's it for this week. Enjoy your photography, be kind, and I'll see you out there.